Graphics in video games are one of those things where I feel like developers believe are too important to us as gamers. And as a result, I feel like the industry has been pushing toward a trend to make the most realistic looking game on the market so they can become the next multi-million-dollar corporation. This push toward realistic graphics is so big that even big-name celebrities like Joe Rogan are reacting to this technology in utter amazement.
Yeah, the thing is making the smoke move. Motherfucker, dude. They're so good now.
No, you can't tell what's real at all anymore.
And I have to say, take that video with a grain of salt, as I think only the car and the flames and smoke are rendered within the engine, but either way, it's an extremely impressive feat to have a car look that real and have the smoke move around in such a realistic manner. Some would say we're entering the Matrix. Anybody want a red pill? The point is that I personally feel like this is a trend in the wrong direction for the gaming industry, because at the end of the day, good graphics don't actually make a video game good.
I'm flying as a bee.
Okay.
Man, I'm gonna play this off stream, man. We're gonna finish this mission up off stream.
The pulse is coming from the balloons.
What's up, Dave?
Pushes the key more back.
Dude,
Discomfort and confusion.
then the camera died.
I'm flying as a bee.
Remember how I said developers are focusing too much on graphics lately? Well, with this newfound focus on creating the next best-looking game comes a lack of attention on what actually matters, that being the game itself.
Okay, I'll bite. What is it, SpongeBob?
Reggie Fils-Aimé is the king when it comes to this sort of design philosophy.
If it's not fun, why bother?
And I feel like it's a lesson many modern game developers have completely forgotten about. Back in the day, graphics were much less of a concern because the technology simply wasn't there to create video game worlds at the scale they are today. Let's just think about the models themselves. Really, they were dealing with frickin' polygons and shapes to then create models that they then shaded and colored in to then make them look like the classic characters we know them as today. Now though, models are no longer just comprised of blocky shapes to make what looks like a human being, no. They're comprised of thousands and thousands of pixels painstakingly crafted to make them closely resemble what we recognize as a human being. Just looking at the transformation Cloud went through should give you an idea of how much technology has changed from back in 1997 to now. Coming from Remake's official Twitter account, the Remake development team went through a very long adjustment period in order to make him look realistic. They focused on his bone structure, texture, and hair.
I mean, I can see the freaking veins under his skin. The detail is insane.
Yeah, back on the PS1, they gave him blocks for hands, threw on a few polygonal spikes for his hair, colored it blonde, and called it a freaking day. That's why I feel like there were so many good Super Nintendo and PlayStation 1 games, because they could focus on the game instead of micromanaging things like bone structure and frickin' hair. Of course, as a result of Square's hard work, the new models in Remake look fantastic compared to the originals. And in a way, it's very admirable, but in other ways, this push towards realism in the graphics actually hurts them, because certain things just don't translate as well when the graphics look as realistic as they do. For example, Remake has this issue where the main cast of the series looks freaking incredible, but put them next to any other generic NPC and my god, it's like you're looking at a completely different game. Now, of course, these are just the limits of technology. You can't have every single model on screen looking as hyper-realistic as Cloud and the rest of the cast. Otherwise, you'd have a stuttery 10-frame mess of a game. But when you're selective about who you decide to give detail to within your game, it makes for an inconsistent experience that takes me right out of the world they painstakingly crafted otherwise. Some things also don't translate well when making graphics so realistic. I hate to keep dogging on remakes, but they're a great example of this problem since we have a point of comparison. Take Resident Evil 4 Remake, for example. Faithfully recreated, graphics look great, updated gameplay that's fun and interesting, etc., etc. But there's certain elements that the original had because of its art style that simply don't translate well when the graphics look so realistic. to the point where I almost feel like they're different games entirely. Or how about the cross-dressing scene in Final Fantasy VII, where Cloud has to dress up as a girl, and it's this silly little cute moment in the original, because Cloud in a dress with the way the graphics looked back then was meant to be cutesy and funny. In Remake? It's definitely an entirely different vibe because you're seeing a grown-ass man in a very realistic-looking dress. Which, if that's your cup of tea, no harm, no foul. But the point is that the scene gives off an entirely different vibe from the original. Before I go any further, let's separate what an art style is and what graphics are, because I really think those are two completely different terms. Because you can definitely have good graphics, but a terrible art style. For instance, Forspoken. I mean, the game has good graphics by modern standards, but my god, does it look like garbage otherwise. The world looks really bland and something just looks really off about the whole thing. Take Avatar Frontiers of Pandora. In some areas, I think the game looks stunning. Then in others, I feel like I'm playing a frickin' PS2 game.
It all turns brown and disgusting. It's like I'm in a PS3 game again.
Yeah, it is, yeah. We gotta un-PS3ify this fucking place, dude.
There are so many different elements that go into creating a game like this, like the lighting, shadows, the flora, the fauna, having those elements move in the right way when your character moves through them. And when you give a company like Ubisoft the reins with all those responsibilities and more at the helm, you're bound to be faced with a visually conflicting mess of a game that hurts your eyes every time you look at it. Artistic direction plays a huge role in making the graphics look good, because you need to think about how those graphics are going to function within your game. If you're aiming to make a shooter, then maybe a more realistic and gritty look would be appropriate to your game. Or say you're playing an RPG. I would say most of the time, realistic-looking graphics like what you would find in a shooter don't really apply. It's better to make things have more of an anime aesthetic to complement the fantasy setting that's usually associated with RPGs. Point being, the art style needs to make sense within your game, and when it doesn't, that's when you get these weird-looking monstrosities that companies have been coming out with time and time again as of late. Let's take a look at an example of this in action. Looking at this video comparing the destructible environments from Battlefield 1 to 2042 is just wow. It's honestly a night and day difference looking at this. The way Battlefield 1 has buildings destruct has this sense of realism to it that is simply unparalleled. Certain parts of the building will fall apart before others, causing it to collapse, and the way the smoke just billows outward looks so freaking good. Looking at 2042, my god, that just looks so shit. There's honestly no other word for it. It looks lazily done and like there was no passion behind how this feature was going to work whatsoever. They missed the mark completely from an artistic and technical perspective, and I can't believe a game that came out in 2016 does destruction miles better than a game that released in 2021. The devs for Battlefield 1 just had a vision for their game, and the passion they had for it shows whenever you boot up the game and play a match. Artistic direction and a vision will always beat out good graphics any day of the week. Think of a game like The Legend of Zelda: Wind Waker. What an incredible game, right? And because of the artistic direction that they went in, the game looks like it could have been released this year, and no one would have batted an eye. Guys, this game was released way back in 2002. Point of reference, that Spider-Man game came out in 2002 as well, and oh, you can see how well that held up in comparison. So long, freak! Either way, with a consistent art style, you don't have 7's issue where certain characters look way too realistic versus the NPCs, and you also don't get the problem of the game aging as time goes on, simply because technology continues to progress, and hell, today's games could very well look like child's play in 10 years' time. Twilight Princess, the very next game in the Zelda series, is a prime example of going for realism and looking worse for wear as the years go by. And that's why art styles are so underrated for me within video games, and why I would love to see more developers go in this direction with their games. Even though on paper, Wind Waker's art style may look worse than 7 Remake's graphics or any other modern-day video game. An art style and a vision for your game's graphics, other than making them super realistic, can serve as a great way to give your game a sense of style. consistency, and personality that realistic graphics can never achieve. I guess this is part of the reason I really enjoy Nintendo's games, because they never get hung up on the small stuff like making their games the next technological masterpieces. They're just focused on making the games good. And while I would appreciate a little more effort in the tech department, for God's sake, Nintendo, at least get your games running at a stable 1080p at a consistent frame rate. My God, it's 2024. I think they're consistently able to put out quality games because they're focused on what matters. But let's not even use Nintendo as an example of games with bad graphics that are successful. That's too easy, right?
I don't feel well. Oh, Jesus.
Let's use a super recent one, like Palworld for example. This is the most wildly successful game of 2024 thus far, and it is shattering records in terms of sales. The game sold 7 million copies on Steam within just 5 days of launch, and has also become the Xbox's biggest third-party Xbox Game Pass launch in the service's history.
I'm all jacked up on Mountain Dew!
The game also has nearly 3 million active users, meaning people currently playing it at this very moment. I'm not sure that was enough to convey how big of a success Palworld has become, but you get the idea. And look at the game. It's nothing special from a graphical perspective. It feels like any other run-of-the-mill anime game that feels like it'd release and be forgotten about within a week's time, but the graphics aren't the selling point here. It's the gameplay, it's the pals, it's the crafting, the bosses, the base building. There are so many elements that make Palworld what it is, and the graphics are just a very small piece of that puzzle. They do their job, and the game looks good enough with a relatively solid art direction that looks cohesive, and really, that's all a game's graphics should ever have to accomplish. Cinematic masterpieces be damned. I want to shine some light here too on how a specific art style can just ooze creativity and charm and make your game stand out without having to traditionally look good. Take a game like Persona 3 Reload for instance, or just the Persona series in general. 3 and 5 are prime examples of charm and artistic direction oozing in every single instance. From the baton passes, summoning your persona during battles, the way the menus just make me want to stare in awe at the animations every single time. The game just looks so damn good in every single way. And there's no need for anything like epic ray tracing technology or the latest engine using the newest tech to take my breath away. Not at all. So while the graphics are relatively simplistic from a technological perspective, the game makes up for it in every other way that it just doesn't matter. And because the graphics don't require a NASA space computer to run the thing, I'm able to run P3 Reload at a stable frame rate at 1440p on ultra settings on a GTX 1070. We're talking very old hardware here. I think at least us PC players, and a lot of console players I'm sure too, can attest to the amount of broken releases we've received on launch day.
You alive, bud?
And a lot of this is due to trying to push the limits when it comes to the graphics, because you have these broken, stuttery messes, weird bugs, and it's clear the developers are simply spread too thin with the scope of their games these days. In conclusion, good graphics don't make the game, and so many of us gamers need to help developers understand that graphics are secondary to what comes first, the fun. I think this is another piece of the puzzle that I missed talking about in my Why Games Aren't Fun video, so if you guys haven't given that a watch, go check that video out after finishing this one. I think this is still a huge reason why I mainly play retro games these days, or remakes of older games, simply because those games didn't have the tech to worry about graphics. Mega Man X, a game that looks like this, is a game I have played countless times over and over and over again, and do you think it's because of the graphics? Absolutely not. It's for the high-octane gameplay, the music, the bosses, even the story, to a degree. Getting that Buster upgrade from Zero will always stick out in my mind as a remarkable gaming memory. And the game did it all with 16-bit graphics. In the comments below, I want to hear about a gaming memory that stuck out to you, whether that be a recent moment or one from your childhood. Let's get the good times rolling in the comments and reaffirm that good graphics don't make a good game. With that, guys, check out my Etsy shop for some retro pancakey goodness to help me keep making videos just like this one, or support me on Patreon, or join the channel for a pancake badge. Really, guys, the options are endless. Really, all I care about is that you guys made it this far into the end of this video. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I will, of course, see you in the next one. Have yourselves a damn good one. Peace.